It looks like we're ready to get started with our final session of the Endurance Coaching Summit. So I know it's been a long 2 days and a lot of information thrown at you, but this panel is one that I'm really excited about because I think they're going to be particularly informative for all of you because on stage right now we have 5 top thought leaders in all of endurance coaching. So and they're going to talk about what's next in the science of coaching. So I'm basically going to let them introduce themselves, and then we're going to start off with kind of a roundtable discussion. So, Robby, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, hi. I don't know how to operate a mic. It says on, I don't know, maybe this one.
Yep.
Just talk into it.
Hello. Okay. I'm Robby Ketchell. I'm a data scientist for Team Sky and co-founder of Winning Algorithms.
All right. I'm Ryan. You guys probably saw me at the Lunch and Learn. If you didn't, co-founder of Best Bike Split. Now, I guess chief scientist of Best Bike Split for TrainingPeaks.
I'm Hunter Allen. I help design and found TrainingPeaks WKO Plus and CEO of Peaks Coaching Group.
I'm Dean Golich, and I'm a premier coach at Carmichael Training System, and this is my performance team.
It's good to be aboard. We're glad to be on your team, Dave.
Some of them didn't know they were part of it, but they are.
The draft is in effect.
How come I haven't gotten paid?
Yeah.
I'm Neal Henderson. I'm founder of Apex Coaching and Consulting, and I do some consulting work with USA Cycling, with BMC, Pro Team, and also with Stride Running.
I'd like to add that most of these guys I'd say all of these guys have grossly underestimated their credentials. So first we'll just get started off with you, Neal, and ask, so what new tools are you using, whether it be software, hardware, gear, wearables, are you currently using with your athletes?
Yeah, if you actually look in my backpack, you'd pretty much see an assortment of these things. Right now, as I speak, I've got a PC and a Mac in there. So I'm running WK04 and 3.0 amongst lots of other things. So specific newer tools, muscle oxygen sensors with Moxie, using the WASP ANT Plus bridge, bringing all the ANT Plus information in, trying to look at it in one screen and one device. I'm actually using some indoor cycling studio software to do that, actually out in the field, the Performance Pro Studio software. I've just kind of adapted it for that use. Using Stride running power meters, so seeing power in running is very different than what we're seeing in cycling and what we're kind of looking for, and there'll be a lot more that you'll see with that in the future. Standard stuff, doing some blood lactate analysis, doing in-lab metabolic measurements, VO2, CO2, VCO2, those type of things. Let's see, right-left power meters, upper body ergometers for swimming, and looking at the differences between power output for a given duration of effort correlated to a swim time to do, say, a 50 and a 400-meter swim. We can look at basically economy in that way. Somebody swimming the 50 meters in this time, swimming the 400 meters in that time, and then having them do maximal efforts for that same duration of effort for the 50 kind of sprint type effort and see what kind of power that looks like, and then the power while on the ergometer for the longer effort and compare the economy, and we'll see some really interesting values there in just work capacity versus actual speed. Those are
That's a pretty long list. Dean, is it?
those are just a couple.
What those are all in his backpack.
I'm not using things that don't yet exist. Though. I'm trying.
Fair enough.
I'm trying to use things that weren't designed for their original purpose to answer the question that I'm looking for.
Dean, is there anything on your list that Neal is not currently using?
No. I guess there's some catapult stuff that we do in sports that aren't endurance-based. So there's some GPS tracking tools that we would use in a team-based environment or a field-based. I guess that's the only thing. And I only brought that up just so I had one thing to say.
I also use a stopwatch sometimes.
Stopwatch. Well, what about, Dean, what about car racing? You coach a very famous NASCAR driver. What do you have the NASCAR driver
Yeah,
do?
it's NASCAR, so they don't use any technology, so that's why it's so advantageous.
They just, you
Yeah.
just have them doing like left
Listen, you
arm
got to go
stuff?
left, and then it's left again.
So Neal, you mentioned WKO4, and obviously Hunter, that is something that you are a co-developer of. So WKO4 has a lot of brand new metrics in it. So can you talk maybe a little bit about what those metrics are and how those can be used to further the science of endurance sports coaching?
Sure, absolutely. Can you guys hear me? That's better, huh? So one of the things that we're doing is we have this new thing called power duration curve. It's not necessarily new, but we're using some new math to match what you can do against our model. So out of that power duration curve comes a modeled FTP. So one of the things that as coaches for years and years and years is we're always trying to find out what's the FTP, what's the FTP? And now we can use that data to find that for you. Now again, I was talking with a couple of coaches here, in the downtime and stuff, and I'm like, well, this thing is not showing my FTP with what I think my FTP is. And I was like, well, when's the last time you did a 60-minute FTP test? Oh, you mean I actually have to do this? I'm like, yeah, it's not like magic, okay? You have to do the work, you have to do it to see kind of how that works out. So it's not necessarily part of that prediction, but it helps define that. So again, a point of triangulation is what we're looking for. The other thing that we have is we have functional reserve capacity. So that's coming out in terms of looking at a way to understand how much work you can do above your FTP. Okay, so very similar to anaerobic work capacity, but we believe we've got a much better model using more parameters that's going to pinpoint that even more. So out of that is going to come some pretty unique metrics down the road. We're working with a couple of hardware manufacturers in the head unit that you might be able to see, well, gosh, how many intervals can I do? And then you might be able to see like even a little gas gauge on your head unit to see, okay, how you start to fatigue. And oh, I'm burning a lot of gas right now. And then maybe you're recovering a little bit because you can recover during that time. And then you can burn more gas. So there's some different things that are coming from that. The left-right balance, that, as you mentioned, is super exciting because we've come up with some new things called gross power released and gross power absorbed. So you release power on the downstroke, and then on the upstroke, you can absorb power. So some of us absorb more power on the upstroke, and some of us absorb less power on the upstroke. So we're learning a lot from this new left-right balance. So those are some of the highlights. I mean, I think we'll see more metrics coming out of these things, and we have some in our back pocket that we're waiting to pull out in a couple of months too, as we need to kind of vet those a little bit more.
Okay, so now recently a hot topic has been predictive analytics, and you're seeing more performance predicting softwares come out. Ryan, Cooper, for you, where do you see predictive analytics going in the future?
Yeah, so I think on the prediction side or the predictive side, it's going to be not so much the raw prediction. You're going to start seeing better numbers there as you can start pulling data out of things like WKO4 to really start to fine-tune input variables into your athletes' kind of models. But I think you're going to see a lot of prescriptive, kind of more like what should they be doing. So tying the race goals, future race goals, back to the training. So if you're looking at where their training is now, what kind of type of times could you expect them to finish? Now let's say, what are they going to look like 6 months down the road? So start to look back into TrainingPeaks, back into WKO4. What can we change training-wise so that we can get them from point A to point B and really try and prescribe how to get that better time out. Also see a direct correlation into run models. So we're looking at normalized graded pace, also talking to Stride a little bit about using power to kind of do similar type of stuff that we're doing with Best Bike Split, but applying it more to running. So if you were to go have an athlete that wanted to get a Boston qualifying time or something, you can say, okay, here are the type of courses that are suited to you. Here's the type of pacing strategy you should use on those courses to make to try and get the Boston qualifying time with your kind of minimal impact or effort on the course.
Robby, do you have anything to add to that? You're working kind of at the high level with people like Team Sky. Is there anything that maybe you're doing now that you see may trickle down to kind of the average age group athlete?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is what is an athlete capable of, right? And did they achieve that? A lot of times when we look at time trials, team time trials, in the races, they come across the line, and you want to know, did they reach their maximum potential, right? And how does that compare against everybody else, so that you can come back and you can redefine how you approach it the next time. From a team perspective, we're always trying with predictive analytics to look at, all right, who are we selecting, right? If we select these 9 guys, what will be the performance gain? If we swap out somebody for a different part of a stage race, how does that change that one event? If it's a team time trial or a climbing hill finish. So it's really trying to see what is our potential and what's the difference when we make some changes. I don't see predictive analytics as being really a push button kind of solution. I see it as something that, as I was talking about yesterday, it really, you have to have ownership in it when you're using it. So a lot of it's simulation work in which you can allow somebody to enter variables and come out with a solution and go back and change that. Because a lot of what simulations do is it allows us to learn something from it. You don't necessarily use it, but you learn something from it. So if you're looking at somebody and you're trying to see what they're capable of in Ironman, and you change some variables to that, right? And you get out the solution, you may go back and say, well, what happens if we go a little bit easier in the swim? And what does that improve something for the bike? And so it becomes a learning mechanism.
Dean, for you, is there anything new in terms of training methodologies? Is there anything that's kind of come to light, or is there anything that maybe has been disproven that has put you down a new path and made you think in a different way towards training, again, not just elite athletes, but athletes in general?
Well, obviously, I think the training models, whether it's an analysis of the analytics for predictive of the performance or the WKO4, the way that I'm trying to use it particularly is that, for example, there's a couple things, like supplementing with antioxidants actually decrease some physiological parameters that help you adapt to a more aerobic ability. There's, say it was cold water immersion after aerobic training is okay. Cold water immersion after resistance training is not okay. So when we're trying to predict overload from these models in a training sense, you need some type of stress. And so many times we're trying to eliminate fatigue or measure fatigue, but we're trying to predict how much fatigue. So that's really the goal. So if I say I need someone, for example, to ride 2 hours, and that 2 hours gives them a certain overload, and all the markers, whether analytical or predictive or negative, how negative do we go? That's really that's the most difficult part for the training. So then, once Robby puts it into the analytics of performance, we had 2 equal guys, but now we've trained them, and we've got an overload that was real specific to this guy that may be much deeper than the overload to the other guy to get their best performances.
Hunter or Neal, is there anything that you've, like I said, either learned recently or something that's kind of been disproven that you've kind of put you on a different path?
On my side, some of the things that I'm looking at more is the rate of gain and adaptation, not the load applied, but the actual improvement and the rate of improvement, because we're not trying to optimize stress. We're trying to optimize improvement. We're trying to look for where we're getting the most gain in performance, not the highest load accumulated, but the rate of gain is something, and accumulation of performance and velocity of that improvement is something that I'm looking at more, and I think WKO will give some additional capacity to look at that. Is one big thing, and a secondary thing to that with the advent of wearables and what's going on there is, right now when we look, most of us when we think of training effort, what we prescribe, we look at the training file of that, 60 minutes, 90 minutes, 3 hours, 5 hours, whatever it is. In a week, there's 168 hours? Tour de France, they were riding, biggest weeks were about 32 hours. That's 19% of the time spent. what's happening the other 81% of the time. Where are the athletes adapting, not adapting, what's going on, what's their heart rate looking like, what's the cortisol levels, what's happening with hemoglobin concentration throughout the day. There are tools with some of the wearables and some of the just smartphone plug-in technologies that are going to give us the ability of actually plotting out throughout the day what these variations are, and then backtracking to the load and the kind of training that we're doing to look at, oh, this person is showing a positive or negative response to this kind of work, so you can get back to a more individualized dose-response relationship on these things.
For me, I've been doing a ton of just research on the whole left-right thing, because one, we've got these new power meters that have left-right balance, and we haven't, for years now we've had them, and nobody's really had the analytical tools to analyze them, to look at it, to see what does this mean. Some interesting things that I've learned from left, right, from the athletes that I have using those power meters, and then for myself, is the fact that we tend to have one leg, and this is nothing new, Dean, so you probably know this already, you've known this forever. I should have just called him. But we have a punchy leg, so one leg punches, okay? And so one leg punches, another leg is kind of the smoother leg. This leg smooths out the pedal stroke of the punchy leg. And then what happens is with the punchy leg, while that may have a higher peak force, it may be that leg has less absorption rate. So you're absorbing less because it's more about punching. Then the other side of that, the smoother leg, may be smoothing out even on the upstroke to kind of get rid of that punchiness on the left side or the right side, whichever one it is for you. So finding those things out can bring some awareness to you. Then there's a change that happens between seated and standing. So standing, you may be more dominant on one leg or the other leg, and that could be completely opposite of what you're doing while you're seated. Then there's the idea too of how it's very likely, and again, this is just a theory now. I've only got 20 people's data or whatever I'm looking at, but I think that it looks to me like we sometimes, a large percentage of us, so let's say 80% of us, put one leg in reserve. So we kind of have one leg that kind of just sits in reserve, and you're riding around at endurance pace, tempo pace. It's not doing a lot of work. And then when you want to do a lot of work, you got it in reserve, and you're like, bah! You really punch it and use that leg. Watch out.
Leg attack.
You got that one leg attack, right? So it's like, I was doing one leg intervals, the other day, and you're like, okay, well, I'm holding this leg in reserve while I'm just riding. So kind of becoming aware of what you might be doing in the different training levels. So from endurance level to threshold to VO2 max to anaerobic capacity, and what are you doing from that perspective of left-right balance? So again, can we change that? Can we change that to increase our total power? I don't know. Some of us will be able to do that. Some of us, you know what? Just pedal your bike. But starting to become aware of those things is pretty exciting.
All right, a question for you, Dean. Where do you think we will see the biggest scientific advances? Neal was just saying how only 19% of the time, even during the tour, they're riding. So the other 81%, what are they doing? So do you see it being in training, in recovery, sleep, nutrition? What area do you think we have the biggest room for growth?
I think it's going to be in the accuracy of the tools. So once they err, and especially in a left-right balance, so for example, now that we have a left-right balance, and one is at 1% error, for example, and the other is at 0.5, getting that data together is complicated. And sampling rates, so I think the accuracy of all the tools, whether it's a Moxie, and you have the near-infrared sensors that are more in depth with the depth of the muscle, all those tools are going to lead to the same analytical model being more accurate. So the same analytical model may not need to be changed, but the tools are going to be much more accurate than they are. And then the calibration of all the tools are easier. And so the use of the tools, I think that's the biggest gain. So that's, in my mind, that's our biggest error right now.
Robby, do you have anything to add on that, being that you've worked with some of the Pro Tour teams?
I think that obviously I'm biased in that I think that data has such a strong position in what we can do in the future, because that's what I work on. I work on data. But what I really see is that earlier this year, I went to San Francisco with Dave Brailsford, and I went around and visited something like 15 startup companies, and we were looking at all these different devices that people were developing, and they all had their own way of acquiring the information that came off of that. But the biggest problem that you have is that when you end up with all these sensors all around you, you have them on your arms, your legs, your feet, or whatever, on your bike, is how do you get that data off, and how do you compare one data set to the next one, right? And so I said the same thing to the first company that we met with, that I said to all of them, and that was, you really need a way to streamline the data capture with other pieces of technology. Otherwise, we're just looking at things in one snapshot. So to answer the question, I think that it's going to be in some of these big data apps. Apps that's going to be able to take in things, synchronize them, be able to cross-compare data so that we can, look at a broader picture of what's happening with an athlete. And also, all these sports scientists and coaches will be able to do it quicker and easier. And then we can ask more questions and develop more devices and start all over again.
Okay, question for you, Ryan. So performance modeling, you've added to it. There's a lot of new things. It's not just you're adding things like weather to it and drag coefficient. What's the process that you come up with these new algorithms to run to make the software more accurate so that we have better data?
So for the most part, I look at every place that we do really poorly, and then I start to look at that and say, what can we do better in those areas? So weather is a big thing. I know Robby talked about it yesterday, and I talked about it today. If we're modeling something and it just doesn't add up, right? It doesn't look right, and then you start to say, okay, well, what are the questions I should be asking, and what should I be looking at? Well, some things like weather are obvious. If you have big weather shifts during the course of a race, it's going to definitely change the dynamic of the model. And so we kind of look at it from that perspective, and then now we're starting to look more at the individualization. So how does this athlete perform in the heat and humidity versus this other athlete? And so maybe their goal race shouldn't be that particular race. Maybe they should go to a different type of race that is more suited to their abilities, at least until they can train their abilities. And maybe they might not even be able to ever bridge that gap. I know Dean and I talked about that a little bit. Some athletes may just be better suited for certain environments. So maybe as a coach, you can start looking at that and looking at their data and kind of breaking it down and help guide some of those decisions for the athletes. And so having these tools that they have and having kind of all these different devices connected and having the data streamlined or standardized, if you could, and all in one place, you can really start to individualize not just the training, but the goals of the training as well. Like, what should they be racing? How should they be racing? Where should they be racing, et cetera?
So we've had a lot of technology come out recently, and obviously starting with power meters, and it seems to kind of be endless. And you obviously have a lot of tools in your bag, but at the end of the day, if the athletes aren't using them, it's kind of useless. So how are you seeing that change? Do you think in the future there's going to be a lot less aversion to tech being used? I think there's still plenty of athletes in the tour that aren't riding with power and some of the basic stuff that a lot of us would be using. So do you think that's going to change in the future?
Yeah, I think there's some bit of it that's like generational gaps. I've got some older athletes that I coach in their 50s and 60s. On both sides of that. Some that are completely on board and utilizing a lot of technology, and some that are literally like completely averse, or even maybe in some ways incapable of grasping and basically getting up to speed on that. So how do I work with these two different people that are using way different things as a coach is kind of a tricky balance, and you need to figure that out. What do you want to do? Are you somebody who is data heavy and that's the way you're going to do things? That's your workflow. That's the way you can speak to them. That's the way that you can help them the best. Or can you step back? When I was with Taylor in 2008, leading into the Olympic Games, my computer crashed when we were in France for 3 weeks, and then directly from there to China. So my laptop had all of my capacity to analyze power files and do all these things. I had printed out his schedule before we left. Again, I'm old school, so I got a lot of things, and my notes are all in notebooks there still, even with everything else being recorded, because for 2 weeks, I had no advanced tools. Everything had to be done, stopwatch, feel, all those things. So on occasion, even the best technology, the batteries die, doesn't work on race day. Sometimes you don't have that. And so I feel as a coach, you need to, again, be able to use all the new tools and things there, but then also be able to sometimes not, and be able to work with an athlete who may not be able to use those tools or have access to them and those things. So you need to be adaptable and have that capacity.
Hunter, how do you see that changing in the future?
It's an interesting question because as a coach, I'm constantly trying to gather this data. So I agree with Robby here. One of our problems is how do we get it into one place and then deal with it and have a good workflow. What's frustrating to me is some of the tech at the same time has reduced my ability to coach. So right now, it's like I have a love-hate relationship with Garmin Connect and this great new, auto upload right to that website, and then it goes right to TrainingPeaks or wherever you want it to. That's really cool. You walk in your house, you push stop, you push the button on there, and it goes poof, and it goes. But guess what? None of my athletes are writing in their comments after the rides now. And it's like, I need to see what they said after their rides. And then I have to say, okay, look, you either have to, stop using Garmin Connect because, but that's really fine, that works for them, and that's cool, or you have to go on and I need your notes. I need to know if you feel good, or that 8th interval was too much, or you bonked, or, whatever happened. I need to see that, and I need to understand that. Because, again, my athletes are all over the world at all kinds of different time zones, and the ones here in the U.S., and if I don't understand reading those notes and seeing what that is, and then looking at all the data, putting that picture together on a daily basis, then I can't make a good decision. So my athletes, I kind of said, okay, look, everybody, you have to put in notes. Use whatever you want to get the data up there, but you got to go on TrainingPeaks or you got to go on WKO, put the notes in there because I have to read them. So that to me is a kind of a challenge right now with some of the tech things. I want it to make our lives simpler and faster and better and everything, but at the same time, we can't lose that personal touch, that art of coaching.
So, Dean, you're notorious. You like things to be proven through data, and so my question is, at what point do you start to truly trust something if it's come out? If there's a new product or a new, is there anything? What is it?
Do you trust anything? What do you trust?
Yeah, that's a good point. I do not trust anything. So I have to validate it many times, and even then I'm always skeptical that it's going to go out of calibration, or I'm going to get data drops, or I'm going to get sampling rates. So the point is not the technology that I'm skeptical about, is once I get an answer, I take that answer maybe more skeptical. So I'm always looking at it like that. So say if someone did, say we were going to do intervals, and it was the best intervals they'd ever done, and their previous was 300 and this time was 305, I'm like, that's good enough. I'm not going to be like, call them up and go, this is the greatest thing ever. You just did the most power you've ever done before. You're ready to win the race. I don't do it like that necessarily. It looked like everything's good. We're in a good situation. Let's move on because of that error. So, yeah.
Neal, for you, is there anything where you want to be on the cutting edge, right? And you want to test these new things out, and then at what point do you feel comfortable implementing them with your athletes?
Yeah. There's a huge component that is maybe on the soft side that nobody's directly talking about, and that's the psychological component and how absolutely critical that is to performance. I could do the most perfect training, have the absolute best plan in place, but if this 5-hole, 10-pound bowling ball up here between my shoulders is not ready for that task, I'm going nowhere. I might not even make the start line because I self-sabotage. I did something completely stupid or whatever, and that happens a lot. So I think actually kind of the psychometric analysis, what's going on over time, and really this is the frontier. Again, the analysis of the physiology and the planning of training is absolutely something that we are getting really, really good at, but managing the psychology, the motivation, all of those aspects are ultimately going to either make or break what is possible happen or not. And being able to delve into that currently, more soft science and getting into that and tracking that kind of information in some way and being able to evaluate that in some way and build that, again, psychological training. It doesn't just, automatically happen. You don't have those tools psychologically. Some people are, maybe have more hardiness or some of these other things, but there's things that as a coach, you need to work with your athletes and use other experts to help develop those things. And I think that, again, trusting information is part of that. Trusting you as a coach, the trust bond that you have with an athlete both ways, you trusting them and them trusting you, is again, no matter how good the information you have and how perfect your schedule is and how perfect the meter is only going to be a small part if there's something broken there.
So Robby, you're obviously working with big data and in very, I would say, pressure-packed situations. At what point do you see kind of the things that you're doing now for Team Sky? At what point are they going to be scaled to a point where the coaches out here in the audience are going to be able to use some of the things that you're doing today?
It's difficult, right? Because you really need to understand what you're using and use it on a daily basis for it to be effective, right? And so a lot of the stuff that I work on is so customized to what the question of the day is and what the particular goal of the team is. And so it's not used on a day-to-day basis for everybody. But I think we learn something from developing those custom tools, and we eventually generalize them for more people. And the more that we do, what I was saying yesterday is we're not really in a position where we can say endurance sports has big data. And until we are in that position that we have big data and it comes consistently for all athletes, then at that point some of these tools will start to spread out and be used effectively for more and more people, I think.
All right. So this is a final question. I'm going to ask it to each one of you on the panel, then I'll open it up to questions of the audience. So from a coaching perspective, what technology will make the most difference in the next 5 to 10 years? I'll start with you, Neal. Put you right on the spot. You don't have to name names or anything.
There's no way he can decide.
The psychometer that
It
doesn't
can be a
exist.
device, wearable, hardware.
The thing that's measuring what's going on here, the psychometer.
Is there anything out there that you wish you could have right now? If you could say any device, I wish it would tell me X, Y, Z. Would that be it? All right, somebody get to working on that one.
So something, a usable tool, reliable tool for psychological, basically wellness evaluation, where somebody's at when they're in a good place, they're capable. When they're not in a good place, they're less capable. So,
Dean, you were just recently part of the Red Bull Endurance Project that did a little bit of research into the mental side of psychology. So real quickly, was there anything either that you as a full takeaway, or just kind of, again, a path that you guys kind of are going to take based on anything from that recent project?
Yeah, so some of what we did as a quick background is we did some brain stimulation, whether it was a direct current or a steady current, to try to either excite the brain over time to get a better performance and then manipulate them psychologically, or a direct current to try to get a better performance that was just an acute. And one of the then backgrounds to that is that then we would put them out on pacing of a PR or something they've never done before and say that was the same power of what they did the day before. So psychologically manipulate them, and it was a 50-50 shot. 2 of them went better than they've ever gone before, and another 2 did the same. Or they tried to pace and they blew up. So no, is the short answer.
a little deception goes a long way.
Yeah, there was a lot of deception, and is multiple days and at altitude, at sea level, and in various conditions, and still we didn't get any good correlation. And again, that was brain stimulation.
So I guess, yeah, then back to the original question then. 5 to 10 years from now, what's going to be the technology you see is most effective for coaches?
Yeah, I still think it's the analytics and the WK4s and the advancement of that. I'd like to say it was in the stock market, because then I wouldn't be here and I just get that tool, be on my yacht somewhere. But I just don't see anything changing that fast. When I look at the other professional sports or not endurance sports and how much data and money we have in that, it's still progressing quite slow. Because I think I'll reiterate what Neal said, is you're still dealing with a human, not a robot. And as big a fan I am of data, you still have to deal with the person. But really, that's why I do it. I mean, Hunter and many of the people who know me here can attest to, I'm as big a data person as you can get. But the joy for me in the coaching comes in the personal interaction with the athlete and so on. So I'm okay with the psychological part of one-on-one. If I could predict it, I don't know if I'd have as good a relationship with the athletes that I work with.
Hunter?
I'm really excited about, again, this kind of some of the new things that are coming with our power meters. I think that if we can see even more data on some of them. So there's a couple of them that are going to start recording at really high speed rates, and so I don't know, again, what we can do with that yet, but that's why we made some highly analytical software to start working on that. So I've seen some of the data, I've played with it, I've worked with it, I've got those power meters that I'm using. I'm starting to see some trends. So I think that from some of our tools, I think kind of agreeing here with Dean, is making them even better and use of how the data is being captured. Right now, one of our biggest challenges is bad data, because bad data really messes up everything. So I spend a bunch of time cleaning bad data, and we're working on a tool to make that much easier for you. But if we can start to see even more data so that we can slice that pie even more, that would be pretty exciting.
All right, Ryan, you're next.
So kind of to reiterate what everybody said up here, I think, well, for one quick question to the audience, so we talk a lot about power meters, but there are tons of athletes that aren't riding with power meters, right? So there's still a lot of coaches here and a lot of your athletes talking back and forth don't have power meters. So in the next 5 years, what we hope is that you'll have a proliferation of more people using these tools. And I know the prices are starting to come down on a lot of these, and so I'm hoping that we'll start to see even bike companies OEM them onto bikes when they sell them. And so I'm hoping the next 5 years that'll kind of be that trend, and so you'll start collecting this more and more data. Now, as a coach, you may or may not want to be looking at all this data all the time, or you may not exactly know everything to do. And so hopefully the tools will start to help guide you into how to look at this data, how to look at the data for an individual, and then also make it actionable to the athletes. So athletes, a lot of times when we talk to them, they're scared of the data. So maybe not show them everything, but show them how they can use it. So I think Robby I don't know if he'll talk about a device, but I think on some of the devices you see, bike computers, et cetera, maybe you can start seeing things that are a little easier to action, right? So instead of looking at the raw numbers, you could have lights, or you could have something else that says go a little bit harder, go a little bit easier. Just kind of something that's much easier to follow for the athlete. And so the numbers are all still being collected and crunched and stuff in the background, but the athlete actually can just have actionable things on race day or in training. So that's kind of what I see in the next 5 years. 10 years, I don't know, hopefully Robby can answer what we'll see in 10 years. So.
Competitor awareness, tool to be able to have a better idea of what your competitors are capable of, because a lot of times, and where they're going to be good, where they're going to be bad, whether it be in different weather conditions, mountain regions, flat stages, crosswind sections, the certain types of Ironman courses, water temperature gets too low for swimming, whatever it be, having that competitor awareness, because you can change your strategy based off of what you know your competitors are capable of. And so I think that's a really important part to endurance sports, because a lot of times we train to just be the best athlete that we possibly can, but we really need to be the best athlete relative to our competitors, right? Because we're trying to win a competition. And so having that competitor awareness where you can really understand where somebody is, where you can take advantage of somebody's weaknesses, right? Or where you need to limit your losses I think that's really important.
All right, well, thank you. Very much appreciate your expertise.